the 26th of January 1945. The snow outside Holzwihr, France, glowed faintly with the reflection of burning steel. Inside a shattered aid station, a German medic paused, staring through a broken window. Across the field, an American tank destroyer burned, its gunner still standing in the open turret. That lone man, First Lieutenant Audie Murphy, was wounded, outnumbered, and surrounded. Yet he gripped the handles of a Browning M2 50 caliber, its barrel glowing red, its rhythm unbroken. In less than an hour, 250 German soldiers and 6 tanks had been reduced to wreckage and silence. No secret weapon, no advanced technology, only a machine born of simplicity and reliability. The M2 Browning was not designed to inspire awe, but to endure. And in Murphy's hands, it became the embodiment of the American firepower doctrine, relentless, methodical, and mercilessly efficient. The Germans called it the Storm of Steel. Historians would later call it the moment that defined industrial warfare when courage met machinery, and a soldier's defiance fused with the mechanical heartbeat of America's most enduring weapon. The field outside Holzwihr was littered with frozen silhouettes, burned tanks, shattered rifles, and men who had learned too late what a single 50 caliber could do. When First Lieutenant Audie Murphy climbed onto the smoldering hull of his M10 tank destroyer, he was already bleeding from shrapnel wounds. His company had been decimated. His radio operator was dead. German infantry and armor were closing in from 3 sides. What remained between him and annihilation was not a platoon, not artillery support, but one weapon: the M2 Browning heavy machine gun. Murphy's stand that winter afternoon encapsulated something larger than heroism. It illustrated a profound truth about the American firepower doctrine, that relentless, sustained fire could substitute for numbers, experience, and even tactical superiority. When he depressed the twin butterfly triggers, the M2 spoke with the deep, rhythmic thunder that had already begun to terrify German troops from Normandy to the Ardennes. Each burst shredded men and machinery alike. Smoke, snow, and fire merged into one indistinguishable haze, yet Murphy did not yield. For over an hour he fired until ammunition belts steamed from heat and German assaults disintegrated under the storm. Later, when Lieutenant General Alexander Patch pinned the Medal of Honor to Murphy's uniform, he was honoring more than a man, he was honoring a doctrine forged in factories and proven on battlefields. The M2 Browning had first rolled off American production lines in 1933, an unassuming product of industrial warfare. John Browning's design was brutally simple: gas-operated, recoil, buffered, air-cooled. It was not the fastest firing gun, nor the lightest. It was, however, nearly unbreakable. It could function in rain, sand, or snow, from the deserts of North Africa to the frozen forests of the Ardennes. This mechanical consistency became a psychological weapon as much as a physical one. For German soldiers, the 50 caliber represented the end of logic in battle, a limb struck by its 12. 7 millimeters round was often amputated. A torso hit meant instant death. Field surgeons could identify its victims by the wounds alone: wide, jagged, irreparable. More chilling still was the realization that cover no longer meant safety. Wooden walls, brick farmhouses, even light armor crumbled before its kinetic force. As reports spread through the Luftwaffe and Wehrmacht, the fear took on a clinical name in post-war medical notes: combat exhaustion. End of section. What began as physical terror evolved into psychological warfare, eroding discipline and shattering morale. The weapon's secret was not innovation, but endurance. The American belief that reliability multiplied by mass production would always outweigh perfection crafted in scarcity. In Holzwihr, Murphy proved it alone. Across Europe, an army of men and machines would prove it again and again. 2 years before Holzwihr, the Luftwaffe ruled the skies over Europe with confidence born of experience. But on the 6th of September 1943, that confidence was shattered above Stuttgart. As 388 B-17 Flying Fortresses crossed into German airspace in tight combat box formations, veteran German pilots prepared their attack runs. They had faced Spitfires and Thunderbolts before, but nothing like this. When they dove in, they met not fragile bombers, but airborne fortresses spewing streams of fire. Each B-17 carried 13 M2 Browning, 50 caliber machine guns, manned by disciplined crews who had practiced firing arcs, deflection shooting, and overlapping fields of fire. A single formation of 36 bombers could unleash over 6,000 rounds per minute, transforming the air around them into a metallic hurricane. German fighters broke through that wall of steel only to find their wings shredded, engines burning, canopies shattered. What these pilots confronted was not just an aircraft, it was the manifestation of the American firepower doctrine. Instead of relying on speed or maneuver, the United States relied on saturation fire and mechanical reliability. The M2 Browning could sustain prolonged bursts without jamming, even in the thin, freezing air at 20,000 feet. Where the German MG-131 and MG-151 cannons froze or misfired, the American guns simply kept firing. Pilots like Oberleutnant Hinrich Wormhöller wrote in despair that attacking a bomber formation was like flying through a storm of steel. He saw tracers everywhere, one glowing round for every 5 invisible bullets. For every tracer you see, he wrote, 4 more unseen bullets are already flying past. This relentless rhythm broke the Luftwaffe's offensive spirit. By October 1943, Germany's elite fighter groups had begun losing their most experienced aces faster than they could be replaced. The B-17 Flying Fortress had turned the act of defense into an offensive weapon. Below them, American engineers and planners recognized that air superiority was no longer about acrobatics, it was about logistics. Factories in Detroit and Hartford were producing M2 Browning guns faster than Germany could manufacture spare parts for its own fighters. Each replacement bomber rolled out fully armed, each with tons of .50 caliber ammunition ready to feed its guns. The battlefield had become an equation, and the United States had mastered the mathematics of industrial warfare. The effect on German pilots went beyond the physical. Every engagement reinforced a sense of futility, the belief that survival depended not on skill, but on luck. This was psychological warfare in its purest form. Fear amplified by repetition, hopelessness sealed by reliability. The more the Americans fired, the more the Luftwaffe's resolve disintegrated. In the skies above Europe, the lesson became clear. Precision might win duels, but reliability wins wars. When American troops landed in Normandy, they brought more than courage and steel. They brought doctrine, a belief that firepower, applied continuously and indiscriminately, could grind any resistance into submission. The fields and hedgerows of the Normandy bocage became the laboratory where that theory was tested. Every jeep, truck, and tank mounted an M2 Browning .50 caliber machine gun. Convoys moving through narrow lanes operated in overlapping arcs. Vehicles on the left fired left, those on the right fired right, saturating both flanks in suppressive fire. This system, documented later as reconnaissance by fire, made every approach to an American column a death trap. German ambush teams found themselves annihilated by returning fire before they could reload their Panzerfausts. It was not just tactics, it was industrial logic. When ammunition is limitless, the safest movement is constant shooting. The M16 Quad 50, a half-track originally built for anti-aircraft defense, became the personification of excess firepower. With 4 heavy barrels delivering over 2,000 rounds per minute, soldiers nicknamed it the Meat Chopper. In the Battle of the Bulge, its thunderous bursts shredded infantry assaults, its tracers illuminating snowfields where men fell faster than they could advance. Even the most hardened German veterans of the Eastern Front called the experience inhuman. Urban warfare magnified this terror. In towns from St. Lo to Aachen, American tank commanders learned that the .50 caliber could erase resistance house by house. Walls that once promised safety crumbled under its impact. German machine gun crews, manning their vaunted MG-42S, found themselves outmatched not in rate of fire, but in survivability. The M2's rounds tore through plaster, brick, and bodies alike. It was no longer a duel of marksmanship, it was architecture collapsing under relentless geometry. At night, the battle acquired a spectral quality. American crews fired mixed belts, 1 tracer for every 4 ball rounds, sending red streams across the darkness. German soldiers, watching from shattered windows or muddy foxholes, described the sensation of seeing death arrive. Each glowing arc was a promise of 4 invisible bullets following behind. The instinct to dodge was useless. By the time they saw the light, the rounds had already struck. It was psychological warfare at its most primal, a fusion of fear, math, and inevitability. Even when German units were unscathed, their minds were spent. Commanders reported soldiers refusing to move by day, freezing under fire at night, whispering prayers as the tracers passed overhead. The American firepower doctrine had achieved its goal. Where the Germans sought efficiency, the Americans pursued abundance. And in that abundance lay the quiet, mechanical certainty of industrial warfare. The idea that reliability, multiplied by scale, could crush even the bravest army. From the skies above Normandy to the forests of the Ardennes, American air power mirrored the same relentless logic that had defined its ground forces. The P-47 Thunderbolt, affectionately known as the Jug, carried 8 M2 Browning, 50 caliber machine guns in its wings. A single flight of 4 could unleash over 13,000 rounds per minute, enough to erase entire columns of vehicles in seconds. To German soldiers on the ground, the deep growl of the Thunderbolt's radial engine meant only one thing: annihilation from above. The Luftwaffe, already crippled after Operation Cobra, could do little to contest the skies. Its pilots were fighting a losing arithmetic, one that favored mass production over mastery. Each American aircraft that fell could be replaced within weeks. Every German loss was irreplaceable. It was the aerial manifestation of industrial warfare, where material output became the decisive weapon. Even when clouds grounded bombers during the Battle of the Bulge, the doctrine of abundance continued on the ground. Half-tracks armed with the M16 Quad, 50 roamed the snow-covered roads, defending convoys and blasting through ambushes. When air power paused, ground firepower took its place. To the outside world, this American approach appeared almost mechanical, a war fought by assembly line and logistics spreadsheet. But within its apparent coldness lay a strategic revolution. By accepting waste and prioritizing fire over finesse, the United States had redefined what modern combat meant. Officers of the defeated Wehrmacht and Luftwaffe, writing in Allied debriefings after 1945, admitted a grudging respect. They no longer viewed the M2 Browning merely as a weapon, but as the cornerstone of a new philosophy, one that measured courage not by restraint, but by endurance. This was the essence of the American firepower doctrine. Fire without hesitation, fire without fear of shortage, fire until the enemy's will dissolved. It was efficient not because of technology, but because of psychology. The Germans had fought with precision. The Americans fought with inevitability. And inevitability, once mechanized, became unstoppable. When the smoke of Europe's battlefields finally lifted in 1945, one truth remained as immutable as the iron that forged it. Reliability had triumphed over brilliance. The M2 Browning, 50 caliber machine gun, forged in factories and baptized in fire from the Normandy bocage to the Battle of the Bulge, had become more than a weapon. It was the mechanical embodiment of the American firepower doctrine, a principle that defined an era of industrial warfare. Historians often note that it was not technology that broke the Wehrmacht or the Luftwaffe. It was predictability, the certainty that American guns would fire, that supply lines would hold, and that ammunition would never run dry. From the skies, the B-17 Flying Fortress and P-47 Thunderbolt rained down belts of 50 caliber fury. On the ground, the M16 Quad, 50 swept through ambushes, and infantry columns advanced behind a wall of unending fire. This orchestration of steel and logistics revealed a new age in combat, one where courage was measured not by scarcity, but by sustainment. The weapon's echo reached far beyond Europe. In the jungles of Korea, the deserts of Iraq, and the mountains of Afghanistan, the M2 Browning continued its ceaseless rhythm, unchanged in design, unmatched in endurance. 80 years after it first rolled off an assembly line, it still mounts the turrets of Humvees, ships, and aircraft. It has outlasted every general, every doctrine, every rival that sought to replace it. Its legacy is twofold: mechanical and moral. Mechanically, it proved that simplicity, multiplied by scale, creates supremacy. Morally, it forced the world to confront the psychology of modern firepower, the knowledge that victory can be engineered, that fear itself can be mass-produced. This was psychological warfare at its most profound, not propaganda, but precision manufacturing. And in that sense, the story of the M2 Browning is also the story of Audie Murphy, the young man who stood alone on a burning tank destroyer and turned an industrial product into an instrument of will. The lesson endures in Operation Cobra, in every convoy that fired through the night, in every reconnaissance by fire that shattered the silence of occupied France. It was not genius that won, but persistence. When we look back on that era, one question remains. Was this the victory of men or of machines? Perhaps it was both a union of flesh and forged steel, courage and calculation. And as long as the M2 Browning still fires, the echoes of that answer will continue to shape how humanity wages war and remembers it.